This week on Mutuality Matters.
Why did this odd, archaic seeming story get preserved in the book of Exodus? And I've become convinced that it's actually structurally and thematically very important to Exodus that this story is here. Zipporah is the rescuer in this story, and she then joins all the other women in Exodus 1 and 2 who are rescuing Moses. And then so that their stories and her story frame the story of the rescue of Moses. So he's rescued as an infant, he's rescued again as an adult here, and it's women doing the rescuing each time.
Hello. You are listening to CBE International's podcast, Mutuality Matters Women in Scripture and Christian History. I am Kimberly Dixon, and I'm hosting this thread that highlights these many women in Scripture and our history. Their diverse examples provide vision and context as we consider how women can faithfully participate in their homes, work, and world. So today I'm honored to host Dr. Carmen Joy Imes, and I look forward to mining her genius as we explore the women of Exodus. Dr. Carmen Joy Imes is Associate Professor of Old Testament at Talbot School of Theology, Biola University in Southern California. She is the author of Bearing God's Name, Why Sinai Still Matters, Being God's Image, Why Creation Still Matters, and the very exciting forthcoming book, Becoming God's Family, Why the Church Still Matters. Carmen has a YouTube channel where she releases weekly Torah Tuesday videos, and you can find her writing on various websites, including Christianity Today, The Well, and the Politics of Scripture blog. Carmen is passionate about equipping the church to engage the Old Testament well and to see its relevance for Christian life. So I invited you, Dr. Imes, to this interview because years ago, I heard you add your thoughts to a roundtable group of scholars who were discussing the strange little passage of Exodus 4:24-25. In this passage, Zipporah saves Moses' life by performing a circumcision. And you said a line that I'll never forget. Moses seems allergic to circumcision. Then you quickly went through all the biblical passages that should have ensured he was circumcised, but wasn't. And then Zipporah, daughter of the Midianite priest and Moses' wife, she was the one who saved the day by performing the circumcision. So your quick little explanation made me curious to hear what you think about the other prominent Exodus passages centering women. So I managed to get you on this podcast, and I get to ask all my questions and bring the audience along with me. So welcome.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm so delighted to be here. I will talk about Exodus and the women of the Exodus any day.
I love it. Okay, so to get started, let's just jump right into Zipporah,
Okay.
and maybe share with your audience, like you did with the group of scholars, what your thoughts are on her.
Sure. Well, this is the number one most mysterious passages of the most mysterious passages in the book of Exodus. I just asked on Twitter last week, what are passages that you want my commentary on Exodus to address? What are the questions that you have about Exodus? I'm writing a commentary for Baker Academic, and far and away, the most common comment that I received was on this passage. People are very baffled about how God, who just commissioned Moses to go back to Egypt to bring out his people, then turns right around and tries to kill Moses. It seems very jarring. And then Zipporah to the rescue. How does she know what to do in this situation? How does she know that circumcision will resolve this threat to Moses' life? How does she know how to do it? Why does she have the supplies with her? She's got a flint knife along for the journey,
She
which
just
is
happens to have it.
Yes. And then what does her statement mean? Surely you're a bridegroom of blood to me. And what is the tone with which she says it? There's just a lot of questions here. And when I started off studying the book of Exodus, I knew I would have to reckon with this passage. It made no sense to me. Why did this odd, archaic seeming story get preserved in the book of Exodus? And I've become convinced that it's actually structurally and thematically very important to Exodus that this story is here. Zipporah is the rescuer in this story, And she then joins all the other women in Exodus 1 and 2 who are rescuing Moses. And then so that their stories and her story frame the story of the rescue of Moses. So he's rescued as an infant, he's rescued again as an adult here, and it's women doing the rescuing each time. So I think that's significant structurally. Zipporah also shows up in chapter 18 when Moses is nearing Mount Sinai. She comes back and reunites with him. And so the three appearances of Zipporah end up framing the rescue of Moses and the rescue of Israel. So I think structurally
Ooh,
she's really important.
wow. That last
Yeah.
bit I had never even considered. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
There's a lot of links, literary links, between this strange passage in chapter 4 and the passage in chapter 18 when Jethro and Zipporah show up. Lots of repeated words, even strange things like Moses and Aaron meet each other and kiss near the mountain of God in chapter 4, and Moses and Jethro meet each other and kiss near the mountain of God in chapter 18. So
Hmm.
we've got lots of parallel language between these two that I think are providing us with a kind of literary structure around the rescue story. So structurally, it's important. I think theologically, it's really important as well. And our mistake is that we read the Zipporah verses in isolation from their context. If you read all of verses 18 to 31 in Exodus chapter 4, there's a series of 7 micro scenes in a row, like each of them is about one verse or maybe 2 verses, and those scenes have all kinds of links with each other, keywords and key concepts, and we need to read them together to understand what's going on. So just before God threatens Moses' life in verse 24, he has said to Moses, "You will say to Pharaoh, 'Thus says Yahweh, Israel is my son, my firstborn.' So I say to you, send my son away so he may serve me, but you refuse to let him go. Therefore, I myself will execute your son, your firstborn." So God has just said to Moses to deliver this message to Pharaoh that Pharaoh's firstborn son is in danger because he's refused to comply with Yahweh's demands.
Hmm.
The very next thing we hear is that Yahweh sought Moses and tried to put him to death. What's going on? Is there a sense in which Moses has also refused to obey Yahweh's commands, and so he's out of compliance? And I think that's exactly what's happened.
Hmm.
For some reason, he has not circumcised his sons, and that is the only requirement for participation in the covenant people of God. So as Moses is going back to Egypt, it's super important that the question of his identity gets settled. He
Hmm.
was born to a Hebrew family, but he was raised by an Egyptian, and now he's married into a Midianite family. He needs to choose who his people are and where he belongs.
Ooh,
He
that's
can
powerful.
he cannot lead the people of Israel somewhere he hasn't been himself. He can't require them to obey Yahweh if he hasn't obeyed Yahweh. And at Mount Sinai, when he encounters Yahweh in the burning bush, God says, "I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." But Moses hasn't obeyed the one command that God gave Abraham, which was to circumcise all the males in his household. So he's going back into a dangerous situation where God's going to have a showdown with Pharaoh, and he himself has not indicated his willingness to obey God's command. And so he can't lead the people well, and he himself is at risk of being among those who are put to death when God puts to death the firstborn of Egypt. So they
Wow,
have this
that's
encounter.
powerful and so
Yeah.
insightful. Yes,
Yeah, so they have this encounter on the way because this needs to be settled before he gets back. And Zipporah, how does she know what to do?
exactly.
But she's the daughter of a priest, so probably ritual is something she understands. We're not told how she knows what to do, but she takes action and cuts the foreskin of her son. And then there's all sorts of mystery here.
Hmm.
She touched his feet with it. We don't know who the his is. Is she touching Moses' feet? Is he touching the angel's feet or Yahweh's feet? Is she touching her son's feet? Are these actual feet, or is this a euphemism for male body parts, which it can be? And I'm not exactly sure, but she says words at the same time. And in the NIV, it says, you are a bridegroom of blood to me. And people often read that with a sense of disgust, like, oh, look what you made me do. This is
Oh,
so awful. And some people even blame her that it hadn't happened before, like she was the one holding out on it, on Moses, or resisting it, and that finally she complied. But the passage doesn't cast any blame on her. And it actually styles her as the hero. And I would translate what she says as, you are my blood relative. So whoever she's talking to, whether it's Moses or more likely Yahweh, when she says, you are my blood relative, she's indicating that the circumcision has had its intended effect. By circumcising their son, their family is now in compliance with Yahweh's demands. They are members of the covenant people. Therefore, that makes them blood relatives.
wow. That transforms the whole passage.
It
That's
does.
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to rewind as I'm thinking about this. Okay. First, the women are the rescuers, rescuing Moses so he can rescue the people. It
Yes.
reminds me of what God called women as an Ezer,
Mhm.
a rescue, like God rescues people.
Yes.
And then Zipporah herself is a daughter of a Midianite priest. And wasn't it the Jethro, the Midianite priest, who his God was the God of Yahweh?
So the scriptures don't tell us who he was a priest of. It doesn't
Okay.
specify who he's worshiping. However, the Midianites are descendants of Abraham through his third wife, Keturah. So there is a connection back to Abraham. It is possible that they've inherited and passed along the worship of Yahweh. It isn't clear in the text where his allegiance lies until chapter 18, when Jethro comes to meet Moses at the mountain and he hears everything Yahweh did in Egypt. He says, "Praise be to Yahweh, who rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all other gods." So we have a testimony of faith in chapter 18. This might imply that he's been aware of Yahweh before, but for him, Yahweh was just one of many potential ancestral gods that he was trying to be a practitioner of. He's a ritual practitioner, and so he's, like most ancient Near Eastern priests, he's aware of many gods and what they're asking for. But the testimony of the Exodus converts him. He realizes Yahweh is the greatest. So we don't know here how much Zipporah knows about Yahweh. She just understands they're at great risk, and she takes action and resolves the problem.
Okay. And the other thing I thought was really important that you talked about was Moses had to basically declare who his people were.
Yes.
Which reminds us that he basically was adopted into Pharaoh's household, and that is his adopted family, his culture. Right. He already tried to take a stand for Israel, but
didn't go well.
He got scared. He ran away into the desert. Yep. And probably just confused. What am I doing? And so God's really saying, okay, now you really need to decide. And this is the moment. So that's powerful. Okay. Quickly on Zipporah, why did she have a flint with her? And what is the significance of this?
I don't know where she got it. Maybe it's just lying there. Maybe this piece of flint is just lying there in the Sinai Peninsula. She just picks it up because they need it at the moment. But flint was used in rituals such as circumcision, and other nations use flint for circumcision as well. So maybe it's a particularly sharp kind of knife. I don't know. I don't know why she has it and how she knows how to use it, but she seems to be she's a skilled practitioner of ritual.
Yeah, she knew what it was.
Yep.
Okay. All right, Zipporah, that's amazing. We're going to jump to my next question because this interview can't be super long. But let's go back to the beginning of Exodus. Because you mentioned it, but most people don't realize that the first two chapters of Exodus focus on the women who in one way or another saved the Hebrew people.
Yeah.
So chapter 1 tells the story of the midwives who refused to obey Pharaoh's edict to kill the baby boys.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story,
Mhm.
especially as it relates to the courage of these women.
Yes. There's so much that we could talk about in these chapters. One of the big ideas that I want to us to notice is that Pharaoh is afraid because the Hebrews are multiplying rapidly. Their population is growing. He's afraid that they're going to join his enemies and fight against him and leave. And so he's trying to dampen their population. And the midwives are part of his plan to do that. But it's so ironic because he says, if it is a boy, put him to death, but let every girl live. And he says this twice, let every girl live, not realizing this is kind of the bumbling fool story.
Mm,
It's almost like the Brer Rabbit story of the ancient Israelites, where they're making fun of their oppressor
okay.
because he fails to realize that women are actually his biggest enemies. He's afraid of the men. If baby boys will grow up to be soldiers,
Right.
but he is bested at every turn by women. And so he lets the girls live, and they're the ones who undermine him, which I just think it's such a fun girl power story
Yeah,
in the
sounds
Bible.
great.
And I hadn't really noticed it until I started translating Exodus from the Hebrew, and I kept coming across verb forms that I wasn't familiar with, and they were feminine plural verbs, and you just
Uh,
don't find very many of them in the Bible. So
Only in
it really
Ruth.
struck
And then
me.
and in
Yeah,
Ruth you go,
right,
wait, and you have to reorient your whole brain. Yeah.
right, exactly. So these women are midwives. Their job is to help women successfully deliver babies, and Pharaoh gives them a very uh, kind of bumbling instruction. It seems all thumbs in Hebrew what he tells them to do, as if he's entering women's domain and he doesn't even know how to talk about it because he's so unpracticed.
That's great.
It's very, very bumbling in Hebrew. But he says, when you're helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, and here the NIV has delivery stool, they're on the avnaim, the two stones, like it's the
Okay.
dual form of stones. And so there's some debate about what does this mean? Is this referring to male body parts? Is this referring to some kind of stool that the woman is squatting on? I'm actually persuaded that he's referring to birthing bricks, which were they were standard furniture or standard objects used by midwives. They were bricks that were fired in a kiln and decorated with images of Egyptian gods, like the
Mm,
goddess Hathor of childbirth.
mm,
And they would stack these bricks in two piles so that a woman could put one foot on each stack and squat down to give birth. And then after the baby was born, they rearranged the bricks into a little platform to lay the baby on.
mm,
They would put down a cushion and lay the baby on it. And the midwife was not just like a medical professional, but she was also a ritual or religious professional,
mm,
in that she was supposed to pronounce life over this child. Um, there, that she had a role that included protecting it from evil spirits.
mm.
So in an Egyptian
Wow.
context, these women were important practitioners of religion.
Yes.
And and he says, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the bricks or on the stones, if you see that the baby's a boy, kill him, but if it's a girl, let her live. So he's imagining this moment of the baby's now been born and they're laying him on the bricks or her on the bricks, and they can see the gender of the child, and they're supposed to put to death the boys. Well, the midwives fear God and don't do this because they understand this is not my job. This is not what I signed up for, what I've
Their
trained to
whole
do.
job is to bring in life, not death.
Exactly. So they refuse to do this, and when they're summoned, when Pharaoh summons them again and says, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" Their response is super comical. They say Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So the word vigorous is chayot, which is a way of saying they're like animals. They're as strong as an ox. And what I love about this is that Pharaoh has been treating the Hebrews like work animals.
Yeah.
And it's made them so strong that according to the midwives, they don't even need a midwife. They just
Oh,
squat down, have their baby, and keep working. And so the midwives aren't even there. Now, whether this is true, they're not even using midwives, or the midwives are lying in order to spare the lives of the Hebrew women and their sons. That's not clear. We do suspect as readers that maybe this isn't quite the whole truth. But in any case, they are living not in fear of Pharaoh, but in fear of God. They realize at the end of the day, I answer to God. And so they defy Pharaoh's orders, and he has to resort to having all the people, telling all the people, if you see a baby boy, throw him in the Nile, but let every girl live.
One of our staff members, Amber Burgess, she helps with this. She's a Hebrew scholar, and she talks about the fact that God blesses these midwives with a house, and it's using the same language that's given to David when David's been blessed with a dynasty or a house.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. And it's possible that midwives normally didn't marry and have families. And so this is kind of an unusual blessing that God is giving them families of their own. Or maybe it just means he multiplied their descendants, because they participated in sparing the Hebrews. In any case, these women are heroes. It's so fun that they are named in the text, Shiphrah and Puah, when Pharaoh himself is not named. And it seems like the narrator is like, let me tell you who to remember here.
Yes.
Let's not even dignify Pharaoh with a name, because that would be giving him more, in the ancient world, the worst fate would be for your name to be forgotten and no one to remember you anymore. And the narrator is very carefully not telling us Pharaoh's name as a way of dismissing him and dismissing his importance. And then he elevates the names of these women right alongside. I think it's just fabulous.
It is fabulous. Wow. That's great. Okay. We're going to take a break where we can hear some CBE updates, and then we'll be right back.
CBE International presents Women in Scripture and Mission. Moses married Zipporah, who was a shepherd and a daughter to Jethro, the Midianite priest of God. When God was ready to kill Moses, Zipporah interceded quickly, like a shepherd protecting her sheep, and she fulfilled the role of a priest by circumcising her son, appeasing the wrath of the Lord, and saving Moses' life. Learn more at ministrywomen.org. That's ministrywomen.org.
All right, we're back with Carmen Imes talking about the women of Exodus. We've got to talk about Zipporah and Puah and Shiphrah, the midwives in Exodus 1. And now we're going to jump to chapter 2, where in quick succession, the narrative highlights 3 women: Moses' mother, then his sister Miriam, and then Pharaoh's daughter, the princess of Egypt. So can you tell us a bit about these women's stories as the Bible depicts them, and what do you find significant about them?
Well, this story is beautifully told in Hebrew. And if you've ever thought about learning Hebrew, this is where it pays off. Because our English translations have tried to smooth out the story or add in extra information, and it's obscured a little bit of the beautiful symmetry. Because the story begins by saying, now, a man of the tribe of Levi married a daughter of Levi. So we begin the story with a daughter of Levi, and then we're going to meet the daughter of Pharaoh. And the daughter of Levi and the daughter of Pharaoh will end up conspiring together to save Moses, which I think is, again, a beautiful symmetry. Here are 2 women who are both defying Pharaoh at great risk to themselves. The princess is in the palace. She's in the halls of power. And so it's going to cost her in a different way. There's a possibility that she'll be seen as a traitor to her nation. And yet she takes that risk. Not only does she take the risk, but she advertises it, as we'll see. So the daughter of Levi gives birth. And in the NIV, it says she saw that he was a fine child. It's too bad that they didn't just tell us what the Hebrew says, because it says when she saw that he was good, she hid him for 3 months. And there's a clear echo of Genesis chapter 1 here. She saw that he was good, just like when God creates the world, he looks and sees that it's good. This tells us that the daughter of Levi is not willing to look at her son as a threat the way Pharaoh does. She's not willing to discard him. She sees him the way God sees him, similar to the midwives who lived in fear of God. And that assessment is what motivates her to hide him. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him. This is another unfortunate translation because the word in Hebrew is tabeh, which means ark. It's the same word as the ark, as Noah's ark in Genesis. These are the only two places where the word appears in the Bible. The Noah's ark and this little tiny ark that she builds out of papyrus. And she coats it with tar and pitch, which is just what Noah did.
Mm-hmm.
And then she places the child in it and puts it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile. And that will become important later, that he's among the reeds. And then his sister is unnamed. The daughter of Levi is unnamed in this story, and so is the sister. And I think this is for a different reason than Pharaoh not having a name. I suspect that the story is downplaying personal identities because of the risks that they're taking here. It's almost whispering them as if to veil their identity so they don't get caught. So it's I think a literary strategy. But it says his sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. And the Hebrew word is she took her stand to see what would happen to him. And why does this matter? Because in just a few chapters, when Moses returns to Egypt, God will tell him to take his stand along the banks of the Nile to confront Pharaoh as he's coming down to the water in the morning.
All these parallels.
So many parallels. So Miriam is taking her stand along the banks of the Nile, and she will in fact confront the daughter of Pharaoh as she's coming down to the Nile. So what we see here is not a little girl cowering in the bushes, but a young woman who is ready to advocate for her brother and ready to make negotiations to do the right thing. So Pharaoh's daughter comes down, and her attendants are walking along the riverbank. So we actually have other women here, other females who are part of this defiance of Pharaoh. And then we have a succession of verbs describing the discovery of Moses. And I love the sense of kind of like we're on the edge of our seats wondering, what is she going to do? Because she is the daughter of the guy who said this baby should be killed. And so it's kind of in slow motion as it unfolds. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. And we're just like, oh, she feels sorry for him. Like, this is going to work. But this succession of verbs is so significant because at the end of chapter 2 and again in chapter 3, these are the verbs that God will use to describe his own, or the narrator will use to describe Yahweh. Yahweh saw his people in Egypt. He saw their oppression. He heard their cries for help. He heard their groaning. He felt sorry for them, and he sent Moses to get them. And so
she's kind of standing in a godlike position.
Yes. The daughter of Pharaoh is if we want to find out what Yahweh's like, watch the daughter of Pharaoh. She's responding to this baby the way he will respond to the oppressed Hebrews. And we don't see any moment where she's commissioned to do this. She's just a woman among these other women who know what the right thing to do is, and she does it, even though it's risky. So she says, this is one of the Hebrew babies. And then Miriam springs into action and says, may I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Which is so much fun because what is Moses going to say to Pharaoh when he's standing on the bank of the Nile and he confronts him? He's going to say, let my people go.
Oh my goodness. How did I never see this?
And Miriam is standing there. She says, may I go? And the daughter of Pharaoh says, go. So she's giving us the response that Pharaoh ought to have given when he was confronted. And so the girl goes and gets her mother. And then Pharaoh's daughter says to her, using the causative, it's the Hifil imperative in Hebrew, make him go. Like she's speaking about Moses and she's like, let him go.
Yes.
And nurse him for me and I will pay you. And so the woman took the baby and nursed him, which is a pretty good gig. I mean, to be paid to nurse your own child is pretty awesome, notwithstanding the fact that she doesn't get to raise him. But still, she went from you're supposed to put your child to death to here, let me pay you to keep him alive, which is so beautiful. Yes. And then she takes him back to Pharaoh's daughter when he's weaned. And this is probably around 3 years old. That was standard nursing length in that time period. So she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So the name Moses has a fun double resonance in it to it. In Hebrew, Moshe sounds like Mashah, which means one who draws out.
Mm.
And it is true that when Moses grows up, he will draw the people of Israel out of Egypt. So he will be the one who draws out. In fact, he draws them out through the Sea of Reeds. Our Bibles always call it the Red Sea. It's a long-standing tradition in English, but the Hebrew reads Sea of Reeds.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Moses hidden in the reeds, and then Moses bringing the people through the reeds, another really cool parallel.
Yes.
But the name isn't he will draw out. She says, because I drew him out. So she's actually, by naming him Moses, she is memorializing her moment of defiance of her father. I drew him out. And every time I call him for dinner, Moses, time for dinner.
Right.
I'm going to be remembering, I was supposed to throw you in the river and I drew you out.
I drew you out. So you better come fast.
So her audacity is like set in stone here. But the other cool thing is that in Egyptian, the name Mose or Moses is also significant, and it means son of. So there's several pharaohs who have this MOS in their name. So Ramses, Tutmos, Ahmos, all of those have that same particle in it. And normally what you do is you attach to it the god who you're the son of. So Ahmos is the son of Tutmos is the son of Tut. Moses is son of question mark. It's
Right.
like he has a half of a name, and there's a question mark hanging over his head about where he really belongs and who is his God. And so the question that we just dealt with
I was saying that
Zipporah,
takes us right back to Zipporah.
it does, because that's finally getting resolved. And notice when God meets him at the burning bush, the first thing he says is, I am the God of your father, singular. He normally will say, I'm the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. To Moses, it's singular. I am the God of your father. And if I'm Moses, I would really like an answer to that question.
Exactly.
Who is
would
my
you think
father?
that is?
Right? Where do I belong? And then when he says the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's a way of saying to Moses, this is the family you belong in. This is your true identity. So Moses discovers who he is as he encounters Yahweh. And he encounters Yahweh as he discovers who he is. The two are intertwined. And I would argue that's always how it works. If we want to know who we are, we find out who we are in our encounter with God. And there's no way to truly know ourselves. We can't just like dig down deep inside to figure out who we really are outside of knowing the one who created us and gave us our identity. So it's a powerful moment when Moses encounters God at Mount Sinai, and we're set up for it by his name Moses, which is kind of a question mark back in Egypt. Like we're wondering until then,
Whose are
who
you?
is his father? Does he even have an Egyptian father? We hear about the daughter of Pharaoh. We don't hear about a father figure.
Right.
And we don't know if she's married or not, if there was a man who was part of his childhood. Even his Hebrew father disappears the moment he's born. A man of the tribe of Levi married a daughter of Levi, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. We never hear from the guy again. We don't know if he even survives Moses' childhood. So he has this hybrid identity that's getting worked out in these initial chapters, and women are the ones who rescue him, who act the way God acts, and who set him up to become the deliverer of the whole nation.
Wow. I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay. So the end of chapter 2 takes us back to Zipporah.
Yes.
How Moses came to know and marry her. Is there anything in this passage that you think is particularly interesting or important for the rest of the Exodus story?
Well, yes, two things. So first of all, this section of Exodus 2, so from 11 to the end, we see Moses growing concern about the oppression of the Hebrews. and he sees an Egyptian striking a Hebrew. He strikes the Egyptian, and the next day he sees two Hebrews striking each other. So there's all this striking language.
Mm-hmm.
And later, God will say to Pharaoh, I'm going to strike you. You're going to know who I am. So this is kind of setting us up for understanding why God is going to show up with great power and signs and wonders in Egypt. What we can see here with Moses is an early impulse towards justice and doing the right thing, and it's very ineffective and messy. He doesn't go about it the right way, but you can see that impulse, and you see it again when he arrives in Midian, sits down by a well. Now, when a man sits down by a well in Genesis, by the end of the scene, he's married or he's found a bride.
Mm-hmm.
So Isaac's servant or Abraham's servant is the one who finds the bride for Isaac, but he's at a well when it happens. And then Jacob finds his wife at a well. And so when Moses sits down by a well, we'd be forgiven if we were expecting him to be married by the end of the scene. And in fact, that's exactly what happens.
Yes.
And in these other type scenes in Genesis, when a man meets a bride at the well, he always introduces himself and does a feat of strength. And Moses shows up, he sees these women being bullied by other shepherds, and he rescues them and waters their flocks. So we again see that impulse for justice.
Mm-hmm.
But he's silent. He doesn't say who he is. So when the girls go back to their father, they say, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. So this again just plays into this question of who is he
Who are
really?
you? Mm-hmm.
Is it what he was wearing? Was it his makeup? Was it
How
his accent?
Yeah.
Did he walk like an Egyptian? Right? We don't know. But anyway, he's married to Zipporah by the end of the scene. And then they have a son kind of in rapid succession. Zipporah has a son, and they name him Gershom, which in Hebrew means foreigner there. And he says, I've become a foreigner in a foreign land. But it's really not clear what is triggering this for Moses. Does he feel like a foreigner in Midian? Or is he reflecting back on how he grew up in the palace? He always thought he was somebody. And then he became a foreigner in the palace when he identified with the Hebrews and took their side, and it put him at risk and he had to flee. He's clearly putting his finger on this sense of social dislocation. He doesn't belong anywhere.
Sounds like
But
a
we don't.
third culture kid.
Yes, he is. But we don't
Yes.
know exactly what he has in mind. So I'll ask him someday as soon as I get a chance. Moses and I are going to talk about this. But for now, we just are noticing again this kind of question mark over his head. He's become a foreigner in a foreign land. And that's then resolved in chapter 3 when he encounters God at the burning bush. So Zipporah doesn't have a huge role here other than connecting him in with his new father-in-law, Jethro, and this sense of growing ambiguity about his identity kind of comes out. And also this impulse to be a rescuer that doesn't go very well in chapter 2. He kind of has a rough start, but God will eventually use that.
And I think the little detail that we often miss is she was a shepherdess, and so were her sisters. And
Yes.
shepherds saved the lives of their sheep.
Yeah.
And later on, that she's rushed to save the life of Moses.
Yes, that's right.
An instinct there.
That's right. And he's also a shepherd.
Yes.
And so they have this kind of co-shepherding role. And, he comes from a family of shepherds. And that's why the Hebrews are settled in Goshen. When Jacob and his sons come down, they're settled in Goshen because they're shepherds and Egyptians don't like to be near them. And so that is interesting to share that.
Yeah. I just love your holistic view of the Bible and how it takes in all these little details, the Hebrew, the parallels, the play on of words. And it really brings the passage to life. And like you said, we often don't see in English, but you just brought it to us, all of those beautiful things. I love that. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share? Or did we touch upon them all?
I would say to listeners to keep pressing in to understand the scriptures and to not be content just skimming over stories where there are women. They often are stories that haven't gotten as much attention in sermons or books. And there's always a possibility that we're losing something in translation. So just keep seeking. There's a couple of new women's study Bibles out that help with this because they're written by women scholars. So I contributed to one that Tyndale published called Every Woman's Bible. And it's really exciting because I wrote the notes to Genesis and Exodus, and other women with PhDs wrote the notes to the rest of the Bible. And we were asked specifically to pay attention to what are women going to notice, what are they going to wonder as they read. And so if you're in a situation, a church situation where you don't really hear much about the women in the Bible, having a resource like that Bible would help you zero in on where are women in God's story. Because
I will make sure to put that in the show notes so people
we are
can
all
find
over
it.
the place in the story, but we are often not given much airtime.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love it. Okay. Well, we have gone over time. So I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a true pleasure. I love the Old Testament. So I just am delighted to hear everything you have to say. How can people follow you and learn more about your work? I'll put in the show notes whatever you say, including the books you've published and are working on now.
Yeah, so I'm active on Twitter and X and Blue Sky. And then I have, as you mentioned, a YouTube channel where I release weekly videos. There are videos on all these stories in Exodus that we talked about today. I'm working my way through Exodus, and it's about a 10-minute video each week to kind of unpack the kind of insights we've talked about today. So people can find me on YouTube and subscribe.
Very good. All right. Well, I'll be including all of that, all of the resources mentioned. So audience, we just want to thank you for joining us today, and stay tuned to the new episodes coming to you from our incredible team of co-hosts. Meanwhile, you can check out our website at www.cbeinternational.org, where you can access the world's largest collection of egalitarian content, watch videos, and listen to audio of past conferences and events. You can visit our bookstore, which contains talented authors and subjects that will enrich your faith and equip you to use your God-given talents in leadership and service to the gospel for all, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or class. I am Kimberly Dixon, and I would like to thank our support team at CBE International that makes this podcast possible. We are Mutuality Matters. Thanks for listening.
Mutuality Matters podcast, along with thousands of CBE's other resources and content, is available for free on CBE's website, which is possible because of donor support. Together, we can spread the message that God calls women and men of all cultures, races, and classes to share authority equally in service and in leadership in the home, church, and world. Give today at cbe.today/donate.